Well, I wanted to talk about the context of the ministry a little. As I said, NCPD was established in 1982, the advisory committee in 1975. And the 1970s were really a big heyday for rights for people with disabilities. It was a very exciting time because there were actually sit-ins of people with disabilities, and NCPD's first executive director, Mary Jane Owen, was in one of the sit-ins in San Francisco because they wanted the regulations. There was a law called Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, and that called for any programs that were federally funded had to be accessible to people with disabilities. And the sit-ins were because the regulations to implement that around the country were not being signed. And they wanted Joseph Califano, the head of, I guess it was HEW at the time, not HHS, to sign those regulations. And so there was a big sit-in San Francisco to get those signed, and there's a documentary about that. But it was a time when folks with the independent living movement was beginning. The Public Law 94-142, the Education for All Handicapped Children Act, was established in the 1970s as well. So it was a really great time of a lot of energy and a lot of passion around rights for people with disabilities. Also, one thing that I think about sometimes is barrier-free environments is where we were at the time, I think. Environments already existed, so you had to retrofit them to make them barrier-free. And then there was this wonderful architect named Ron Mace, who worked out of the University of North Carolina, who came up with the concept of universal design, which was huge because it said do it right in the first place instead of just retrofitting what was already established. So I think in those early days, some of the emphasis was on physical access and just being able to get in and move around, as well as educational access with Public Law 94-142, and opportunities to really be engaged in community. So the late 70s and late 70s, the 70s, late 70s, and then the early 80s was the time when we were trying to get these implemented. I had mentioned in a previous talk that when I came to Washington, I worked with what was called the American Coalition of Citizens with Disabilities. It was an amazing group it was a coalition of existing disability rights organizations like those for people with a deaf, or several of the groups who worked with individuals who are blind, and Spinal Cord Injury Foundation, to really coalesce and work together together they were able to accomplish more than splintered in their own individual groups, to make sure that those regulations got signed and those laws got implemented. So NCPD was born out of that context, and I had been working at ACCD training people on their rights under those laws. So I kind of brought that knowledge as well as then the beauty of the pastoral statement to kind of wed the two. And of course the pastoral statement talks about rights as well, and talks about full and meaningful participation, not only in a life of faith, but in society as well. So it was an exciting time where people were really working to make sure that they could have a role in society and in their life of faith, thanks to NCPD. And the folks who were already working on it in the dioceses, parishes, and the other organizations.